Good evening, friends, and welcome to the 24th lecture in this AOI PG lecture series, which has been brought to you by AOI. We've had an excellent run. So today is the 24th, which means 6 months of lectures every Wednesday. And we're very pleased to tell you that almost 3,700 people, our ENT colleagues, have been logged on to our lecture series. And we've had a variety of lectures all through. And today is the last one of this particular series. And this time we are bringing something that is very specifically directed towards our residents and young consultants. So the speakers for the evening today are Dr. Soumendra Bandopadhyay, who will be speaking on scientific article writing. And the second speaker is Dr. Vishal Rao on research as a career to broaden the academic horizons. Both are very eminent speakers, and we have an equally eminent set of moderators for the evening. So the first moderator is Dr. Shalini Jadia from Bhopal. She is the professor and head of department ENT at the People's Medical College, Bhopal, which is a postgraduate teaching institute. She has done her MS ENT from Jabalpur, but has worked in Mumbai in the year 2007 and 8 and at most of the eminent hospitals here, which is Jaslok, Wadia, Breach Candy. And she has also done her fellowship with Dr. Sultan Pradhan at the Prince Ali Khan Hospital. So she has varied interests ranging from otology to oncology. So welcome, Dr. Shalini, and I hand over the mic to you to introduce the first speaker for the evening.
Very good evening to one and all. Thanks to invite me on the eminent board. I invite Dr. Soumendra Bandopadhyay, sir, Professor, Department of ENT, Medical College, Kolkata. He's chairman of editorial board iJohns. Need not to introduce, he himself is a personality in himself. And he will speak on scientific writing. So I give on Dr. Samir Bhargavayan, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Jadia. Now, should I start sharing the screen?
Yeah, sure, sir, please.
Good evening, everybody. In this penultimate presentation of AOI lecture series, it is my humble presentation to encourage our juniors to publish their research works and experience in a written format and to make writing a scientific paper simple and less arduous. I have also tried to mention some common pitfalls you should consciously avoid. Philosophically, science can be seen as a combination of three essential things: a communal collection of knowledge, a method of evaluating the efficacy of scientific theories, and an attitude of skeptical inquiry, and the belief that all scientific knowledge is provisional and subject to revision when confronted with new evidence. The growth of science knowledge is predominantly incremental. We build on past knowledge more often than we displace it. Thus, the first pillar of science, a communal collection of knowledge, requires mechanisms for disseminating and preserving knowledge within the scientific community. A scientific paper must be original, reproducible, and accessible to the scientific community. A scientific paper can also be seen as a critical argument where we raise a problem or pose a question, argue the strength and weakness of the evidence to draw a conclusion. Books, conference presentations, university teaching, and scientific publications are the traditional tools for disseminating scientific advances. By far, the most important mechanism in use today is the scientific publication. Although there are many forms of scientific publication, the most important is the peer-reviewed journal paper. However, many scientists and doctors do not consider themselves to be good writers. So how can the average scientist write a good scientific paper? The good news is you need not have to be a good writer to write a good science paper. Good science writing does not require creative writing. Just be careful. Remember that in a scientific paper, the emphasis is on science. It is not a creative writing. It is a narrow genre with a narrow, though very important purpose. Let us explore the main steps of converting an idea into words in the form of a manuscript for publishing. Here we will discuss how can we convert our ideas into published papers by following some simple rules. We should be clear about the purpose of writing the paper, the subject on which you want to communicate. The audience is also important. If I want to write on cochlear implants, the approach will be distinctly different when the target audience is the cochlear implant specialists rather than when I write for the general ENT doctors. Writing a paper and getting it published in a peer-reviewed journal is hard work. The work may get rejected even after the hard work that led to the publishable results. So why do people do it? What motivates the authors? It may be simple altruism, where we want to contribute to the advancement in science. Publishing can also bring tangible benefits to an author, thus providing a self-interested motivation for writing and publishing a paper. The familiar publish-or-perish paradigm in the academia adds a proverbial stick to the carrot of career advancement. But even without these obvious professional motivations, almost all human beings crave for recognition. I know I am highly motivated by the reward of pure recognition. I am gratified to see my works used and referenced, and I take pride in publishing in journals that I respect and admire. Self-interested motivations are not inherently bad or even fundamentally worse than the altruistic motivations. A balanced altruism with self-interest produces wonderful results. But beware of the uncontrolled situation where the winner wants to take it all, wants all the publications in his name to get all the positions in the hierarchy. It breeds unbalanced selfishness and even fraud. Let us get back on track. Literature search is the first thing you do before you undertake any project to evaluate the existing pool of knowledge. You may confirm or refute some of it to add to the existing knowledge or to develop something new. The literature search is not about finding the relevant papers. You will have to read them. Now you ask yourself, what is in the literature? Do you agree with all? What is your experience? Do you have a different angle? Do you want to add or alter any of the existing knowledge? It is a lot of work, average 20 to 30 drafts before it gets published. So do not do it unless it is worth it. A single research question clearly stated with adequate evidence for the answer is all that is required. Try stating the question and its answer in simple sentence. Let us take an example. This paper was published in 2018 in National Medical Journal of India. The article was on rapid antigen diagnostic testing for diagnosis of group A beta hemolytic streptococcal pharyngitis. So here, what was the research question? Does the rapid antigen detection technique has more diagnostic utility than throat swab culture in the diagnosis of streptococcal pharyngitis? That was the question. And the answer they got, that the rapid testing has similar sensitivity, but it is reliable, cost effective, and can be employed where facilities for routine throat swab culture is not available. So this is how we carry on our study, we present our study, and we present our research questions to have an answer. So read before performing the research, and certainly before writing the paper. Do not rely on your memories alone. Note it down, utilize the search engines, and look for the recent publications. So plan and execute research with publication in mind from the very beginning. Detailed documentation is needed from the word go. Keep the laboratory notebook or its e-avatar handy for this essential job. The fool collects facts, the wise man selects them. So raw data is often manipulated, reformatted, filtered, summarized, and graphed before being presented in a publication. If after publication someone questions the validity, let it not be a situation where you do not have any data with you other than the charts and graphs. Avoid such uncomfortable situations where the journals had to retract the articles on the use of hydroxychloroquine in COVID-19. Plan a paper with publication in some journal in mind. A paper must meet 4 criteria before it is publishable in a scientific journal. The content of the paper must match the scope of the journal. The quality of the paper must be sufficiently high. The study must present some novel results, and the results must be significant. The standard structure of a scientific paper is the EMRAD format: introduction, methods, results, and discussions, and after that, you conclude with your own opinion. The EMRAD format is easier for the writer to organize the content, and it is also easier for the reader to find the information they seek. Now we will organize our paper in the EMRAD format. In the standard rhetoric, the introduction section should answer 2 questions: what and so what? What is the paper about and why should the reader care? In introduction, establish a territory. What is the field of work? Why is this field important? What has already been done? Now establish a niche. Indicate a gap in the knowledge or a challenge that you want to encounter and occupy that niche. Outline the purpose and announce the present research. It is a wastage of space and time if you provide unnecessary background information telling the reader what they already know or what they need not know. You should not exaggerate the importance of the work or fail to clearly state what research question this paper is trying to answer. Materials and methods describe how the results were generated. A method is used here more broadly than an experimental method. It should be sufficiently detailed so that an independent researcher working on the same field could reproduce the results to allow validation of the conclusions. Often, this does not require explicit step-by-step instructions, but rather references to prior publications that provide such details. If you want to present a method that is novel, a much more detailed description is required. For standard or well-established methods, naming the method may be sufficient. Let us analyze the requirement for sufficient detail a little more carefully. The reader should be given the ability to reproduce the results and the ability to judge the results. Although very few readers attempt a replication of another's experiment, most careful readers attempt to judge the validity of the work they are reading. Internal validity means the conclusions drawn are supported by the results presented. And the external validity refers to the degree that the conclusions can be generalized. Describe not only what was done and how was it done, but it should justify the experimental design as well. Of the many options available, why was this method chosen? Statistical considerations such as sampling plans and analysis methods should be explained. A common shortcoming of the method section is in many papers today is that the author abandons the goal of reproducibility. Usually citing economy as the driving principle, method sections are often overly brief and lacking in detail. Rarely does a method section explain why one approach was chosen over another. Some researchers may not want their results to be reproduced, or to be more frank, may not want the validity of the results to be questioned. Others may want to hide the necessary details for commercial reasons. But the advancement of scientific knowledge requires both reproducibility and ability to judge the quality and validity of the published results. Other common pitfalls when writing the method section is including results in the method section, drawing some extraneous details unnecessarily into the method section, or treating the method as a chronological history of what happened rather than describing it in a more logical way. The results are short and organized with tables, figures, and charts to complement the text. But citing the result is not adequate. Evidence does not explain itself. Explain the results in the discussion section. Answer the research question. But here, one difference with the introduction is that the discussion section inverts the format of introduction, moving from the specific, that the results generated in this work, to the general. That means how these results demonstrate a general principle that can be more widely applicable. Discussion section is the hardest section to write. Discuss without just repeating the results. Show the relationship among the observed facts. The discussion generally passes through stages of summarizing the results, discussing whether the results are expected or unexpected, comparing the results to previous work, interpreting and explaining the results, and hypothesizing about their generality. The shortcomings or limitations of the study should also be mentioned in the discussion section. The pitfalls are lack of organization, presenting results that are never discussed, presenting discussion that does not relate to any of the results, presenting results and discussion in chronological order rather than in logical order, ignoring results that do not support the conclusions, or drawing conclusions from results without sound logical arguments to back them up. Conclusions section provides a brief summary of the results and discussion. It should be reader focused. I will explain it later. The conclusion section should allow for opportunistic reading. When writing this section, imagine a reader who reads the introduction, skims through the figures, then jumps to the conclusion. The conclusion should concisely provide the key message or messages the author wishes to convey. State your conclusions as clearly as possible. Summarize evidence for each conclusion. End with a short statement regarding the significance of your work. While you should not introduce new evidence or argument, be careful not to repeat the arguments made in the results and discussion. Write only the final and most general conclusions. Deserved or not, scientists and doctors have a reputation as bad writers. An average person reading a scientific journal paper will likely to come away numb within a few seconds. If you feel that you are not as good a writer as you want to be, what can be done? Specifically, how can you improve your writing for a scientific journal paper? Style is a layered concept, and learning to improve your style means mastering words and grammar first, clear and accurate sentences next, then paragraphs that communicate the complex thoughts, and finally an organized whole that contributes to the accumulated knowledge of science. If it sounds like a big task, it is, because it is. So start writing using the words that come most naturally. Then revise, rewrite, revise again with accuracy, precision, and clarity in mind. Sleep on it. Let someone else read it, and then revise it again. Omit needless words, make definite assertions, be specific, definite, concrete, and avoid fancy words. In the scientific style, the most valued attributes are accuracy, precision, clarity, concision, and grace, in that order. A scientific paper is claiming new knowledge. Claiming too little gives question to the value of the paper, and claiming too much gives question to the competence or integrity of the author. Hedges are never desired, but are almost necessary always. Validation I have described previously. Acronyms are of two types: initialism or abbreviations. Initialism means the words NATO, laser, like that, and abbreviations like FDA, MCI. Avoid acronyms in the title and the abstract. When you use an acronym for the first time, spell out the whole thing. Figures and their captions are better off without acronyms. If the reader is not familiar with the acronym, its use will likely to detract the readability of the paper rather than enhancing it. Figures should be submitted to contribute towards good print reproduction. Submit high resolution figures, submit full size figures, submit high contrast color graphics, but keep in mind that these plates may be published or printed in grayscale. Figure with multiple parts should be submitted in a single file. When you submit microphotographs, mention about the stain and magnification. Graphs take the advantage of the magnificent power of human brain to recognize visual or spatial patterns and to quickly change focus from the big picture to small details. Graphs are used for data analysis and for data communication. What does a graph aims to do? It tells a story, or at least an integral part of the story. Document the data. A graph is often the only place the data gets published. Make comparisons, allow for inferences of cause and effect, and integrate with the text to enhance the overall communication. We have softwares to convert our data into graphs, define the message to be conveyed, choose the software, pick a style that supports the message, construct the graph seeking clarity, revise it until it is right. Thus, the first choice, that is define the message, is probably the most important because it defines what the graph and the paper will and will not be about. Graphs should communicate the essence of the results from the paper and not get bogged down in detail. Like magicians, chart makers reveal what they choose to reveal. Tables can be utilized for quantitative analysis and for comparing results also. Keep the tables simple, focused, and restrict the numbers to the essential minimum. The rows can be better utilized for comparison, placed next to each other. Design the tables to be understandable without the text. If a paper includes a series of tables, use the same format for each one. Be sure to follow the instruction to the authors. Citation is also important. A new work should be placed in proper context with respect to the past work upon which it builds. Arranging references is also a tedious job to do. Citations provide sufficient context of the work to allow for critical analysis of the work by others, and thus to enable the readers to gauge for themselves whether the author's conclusions are justified or not. Give the reader sources of the background and related material so that the current work can be understood by the target audience. Acknowledge and give credit to the sources relied upon on this work. That is, acknowledge the use of another's idea and thus upholding the intellectual honesty. Faulty citations are usually a result of sloppiness on the part of the authors, such as not doing the literature search in the beginning, frequently incomplete and inaccurate copying, and citing without even reading it. The common mistakes found in citation are major two types: the major error and the minor error. Major error is article is not found. Minor errors signify faulty punctuation or spelling, article titles, name and initials of the authors, or the citation style. Some other aberrations, these are unethical, has also been noted by, I'm not going to elaborate on them. These are, remember these things: spurious citations, biased citations, self-citations, and excluding contrary evidence. Title and abstract. Give proper importance to these two things because they actually sell your paper. Getting someone reading the title to read the abstract and someone reading the abstract to go farther and read the paper. The purpose of the title and the abstract is matchmaking, matching a paper with the right readers. Nothing works better than a well-written title and abstract to make sure that the wrong reader does not waste time on the wrong paper and the right reader does not mistakenly skip over the right paper. The title and the abstract are the first two things a reader sees. So these should be the last things the author writes. Abstract is a standalone summary of your work. It should be concise and precise, and most journals expect the abstract to be within 150 to 200 words. The abstract should also be structured in a way somewhat similar to the IMRAD format for the paper. It is structured as background, aims and objectives, materials, methods, results, and conclusion. It has structured abstract contain more information. It is easier to read, easier to search, facilitate peer review, and it is preferred by the readers and the authors. In abstracts, avoid certain things. Phrases like "in this paper," "we report," "will be discussed," and if possible, avoid writing in the first person, I, we, or the author. Phrases like "new" and "novel" should be avoided. Abbreviations and acronyms are not for the abstract section. Citations better avoided in the abstract section. If you want to cite, if it is mandatory, then cite the whole thing. The abstract is a self-sufficient thing. And avoid referring to the tables and figures you have in this text of the article. So abstract is self-sufficient. Poor abstract that we often get are usually written as afterthoughts. Some of the abstracts are nothing but the first paragraph of the introduction. Give some thought to the abstract. All the important keywords must be found in the title and the abstract. It is better to follow a checklist to assess the completeness of the abstract. Is all the information in the abstract consistent with what is written in the body of the paper? Can all the information found in the abstract be found in the body of the paper? Is the most important information of the paper found in the abstract? Are any keywords from the paper missing from the abstract? Gone are the days when you will find persons flipping through the pages of a print journal to find your article. your article must come relatively high on a general or science-specific search engine results list. So chances are you will start with only 1, 2 or 4 words or phrases to search your articles. And here comes the importance of keywords. Properly chosen keywords improve the visibility of your article. Around 2 million articles appear globally every year in about 30,000 peer-reviewed journals. It is nearly impossible to find out my choice if this article is without a proper title, abstract, or keywords. Here also, you see the same example I am citing. I'm looking for some to diagnose the streptococcal pharyngitis quickly. So I search for this article and I search with keywords pharyngitis, diagnosis, and throat. And these keywords brings me up this article, this abstract as the second search result. So I am going to read this article. So this is how we can improve the visibility of the article by choosing the proper keywords. Now your draft is ready, but you still have a job in hand. Do you have co-authors? Which journal to choose? When will it be published? How to deal with the peer review process? And author of a scientific paper is anyone who has made a creative contribution to the words or ideas being presented that are claimed to be novel. Authors are mentioned serially from greatest contributions to the least. The name of the head of the research group traditionally comes last. Be careful to list your name in the same way from paper to paper so that you can build up your list of papers. Some unethical practices have also been noted here also. Some names may get included unethically, while some others may be left out, though they deserve to be included as authors. The journals now have almost zero tolerance towards plagiarism. Copying another's idea, copying another's images, copying another's words, duplicate publication, self-plagiarism, salami science, all are considered plagiarism. The professional societies and some professional publishers publish about 30,000 peer-reviewed journals. So, where to submit the manuscript? Consider the prestige factor, the circulation factor, the frequency factor of the journal, the audience factor, and also try to assess whether this article will be accessible to the peers. Some sites are there where you can where they show the journals that are widely read and cited. So you can consult these sites. The impact factor may be calculated by noting the number of citations relative to the number of articles published, but it has its fallacies too. Forget about the journal impact factor. Choose a journal that you normally read. Now come to the final steps. A draft is ready. Select the journal, read the instruction to authors, finally ready the final manuscript, modify it, refine your abstract, finalize the title, choose the keywords, and submit it. When you submit, your folder has these following things: the front matter, the article body, and the end matter, containing all the parts. Avoid predatory journals at all costs. They will accept and publish anything for money, but believe me, nobody will ever read these articles. Please check if this journal is indexed with the directories you visit or with DOAJ if it is an open access journal. After you submit the manuscript, a lot of interaction will happen between the authors, editors, referees. That again will lead to lots of revised manuscripts before the manuscript is accepted finally for publication. Even if your submission is rejected, don't lose your heart. Think, was it sent out for review? If not, consider change the type of the journal. Submit to some other type of journal. Modify the weak parts as suggested by the reviewers. If the reviews do not suggest changes, send it out quickly to another journal and follow the 3 journal rule. Thank you. Wish you a happy writing. Dr. Jadia to take over.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, sir. Any questions from the audience?
Okay, if there is nothing, we can move over to the next topic.
Hello, Shalini madam, Soumendra sir, currently there are no questions.
Okay,
So we can move, we can take the any questions at the end of the second talk.
Yeah. Okay, okay.
Right. So I think is Dr. Bharati there? Okay, then in that case, we will move on to the second part of the session today. Our moderator for the second session is Dr. Sushil Jha. Dr. Jha is the professor and the head of department ENT at the Government Medical College, Bhavnagar, Gujarat. He's an alumni from the BJ Medical College, Ahmedabad, and has a total teaching experience of more than 20 years. And his interests include otology, facial-maxillary surgery, and oncosurgery. So welcome, Dr. Jha, and please introduce our next speaker for the evening, Dr. Vishal Rao. Dr. Jha, please unmute yourself. So you're not yet unmuted. Dr. Jha, you need to unmute yourself.
Hello, Dipesh. Can you?
Yes, sir. Can you hear, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir. Very good evening to all, sir. Sir, first of all, I thank AIF team for nominating me as a moderator. Sir, I take privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker for today's talk, Dr. Vishal Rao. He is presently the Regional Director of Head Neck Surgical Oncology and Robotic Surgery and Associate Dean Research and Academics at Healthcare Global Cancer Center, Bangalore, India. He is a TED speaker and has more than 18 patents filed for his innovations on medical devices, drug techniques, and theories. He is a member of the consultative group to Principal Scientific Advisor, Government of India, and member of high-powered committee on the tobacco and cancer control, Government of Karnataka. He is currently the editor of Journal of Precision Oncology. He has been conferred the honorary FRCS by the Royal College of Surgeons, Glasgow, and recipient of the Judy Wilkenfeld Award for Global Excellence in Tobacco Control 2017. He has been recipient of Kemp Gowda Award, the highest civil award conferred by the Bengaluru Corporation, and the Kannadiga of the Year Award 2018. Sir, I request you to speak on today's topic, research as a career to broaden the academic horizons and enlighten us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. At the outset, thank you, Dr. Sushil Kumar, sir, for this generous introduction. And I again thank AOI for giving us this opportunity. Dr. Samir Bhargava, sir, Dr. Rekha madam, for giving us this particular opportunity. Bharti madam for this special opportunity, because when Bharti madam first spoke to me, she asked me which topic would you like. You suggest to me what do you think would be apt And she said the theme at this point, Vishal, would be around research. So why don't you talk on it? And I was very interestingly and with apt attention listening to Soumendra sir when he was speaking. It was a very beautiful and enlightening lecture, and I'm sure we've all learned a lot from what he's done. So I think he's made a lot of my work easier when I'm going to talk on research as a career. And I think what he very beautifully put together was one aspect of the final product when you write a paper. Now, I'm going to little touch upon the aspects of what happens before you write that paper. And I think the very interesting part of these talks are, the first one is the consequence of this research which has been spoken to him. So now I'm going to touch upon the other aspects of the research as a career. So I'm representing HCG here. We are a chain of cancer centers. We are actually about 26 odd centers across the world. We went public in about 2016 with the presence now in Africa, Vietnam, and several other parts of the world. And we also have some presence in fertility. We have a separate vertical called Strand, which works on bioinformatics research, clinical CROs and trials. And we have 3 multi-speciality hospitals. So our model of the cancer care delivery has been studied by the Harvard Business School to publish a case study on it, to understanding balancing quality outcomes with costs. We also run a very good, strong head and neck cancer surgery fellowship program with the Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, and which is jointly given a degree of fellowship with the Royal College of Surgeons. We've recently launched this Journal of Precision Oncology with Walter Kluwer, and we run some programs on scientific writing and publishing with the Nature Masterclass. So we run a whole lot of courses which are certified by the university. We've also been affiliated with the Deemed University and with DNB. So that's just a brief introduction about our center. Now today, what I'm going to touch upon and maybe ask you all to think over is when to do research, when do I look at possible inventions, innovations, and when do I look at a jugaad? Because I think India needs to look at this entire ecosystem together as one single gamut of possibilities before them. So what I'm going to be speaking to you in the next few minutes will be about how do we address the need to recreate sustainable translational research to advance patient outcomes. The first slide which Soumendra showed on science, I think was a very, very apt kind of conglomerate where he brought those 3 pillars together. And that is what are the 3 pillars of knowledge, the work, and the aspect of attitude that actually brings research into fruition. So, I want to just start with asking and addressing the fundamental question of why we do research. This was a very interesting paper that was published by Barbara Starfield from the Public Health Group in Johns Hopkins way back in the 2000. Now they wanted to understand a fundamental question about, is US healthcare really the best in the world? So to understand that, they actually looked at mortality as one of the indexes, and they wanted to study and see what actually happens in United States, and they wanted to study this not too much in detail. So they came to understand that the key important causes of mortality in the United States were the cardiovascular diseases, which was number 1, and cancer, which was number 2. This was a very, very interesting paper that I wanted to share with you, because I wanted to, at this juncture, also pick your brains and ask you a fundamental question on this particular topic, and ask you, what do you guess was number 3? If somebody can take a guess and tell me what was number 3. The number 3 in this was a doctor. The doctor was the third leading cause of death, with almost 250,000 deaths per year actually attributed to a doctor in this particular study, which talked about 12,000 unnecessary surgeries, 7,000 medication errors, 20,000 other errors, 80,000 infections, 1 lakh non-error negative effects on drugs, a total amounting to 250,000 deaths per year, which occurs from iatrogenic causes. Now, this was the capital medicine that they showed from United States, and trying to fundamentally answer the question which I asked before about, is United States the best healthcare system in the world? Now, the point I'm trying to tell here is not to try and talk something about doctors or something, but fundamentally, a lot of outlook in this world has changed over medical profession. A lot of outlook has been questioned in terms of our motive, in terms of communication and other things. But at the same time, governments across the world have not re-emphasized on the aspect of research. Why do we need to do more amount of research? Because again, at the end of it, medicine is an uncertain science. Lot of the times, the biggest success of today and the breakthroughs will be considered the biggest blunders of tomorrow. So we are all like tiny dwarfs sitting on the shoulders of giants, peeping through. And there is a whole lot of science ahead of us which we don't know, which like what again Dr. Somendra said, is a lot of it is presumptive and it is based on past. So the question often arises is, in this kind of a setting, research should be an integral part of the system, curriculum and our profession. Whether we are in government, whether we are in private or in any other sector, we have to work towards an inclusive research ecosystem in our profession. And that brings me to the fundamentals of the hallmarks of the 21st century will be evidence-based medicine, risk communication and medico-legal litigation. And my friends, in all three of these aspects, research is going to be an integral part of it, because evidence-based medicine will be based on research and based on which you will treat the patient. Risk communication will be purely based on research. So when I tell a patient, and if he is going to ask me, sir, will this particular surgery be successful and what will be the chances of recurrence, I should give him a perfect answer to say, based on our own hospital data or based on Karnataka's data or Indian data, we have published proof to show that in stage 3, when we operate all these patients, they have a 60% survival, which means 40% of them at 5 years will not be living. Now, this is what is called as a effective risk communication, which can only come from research. And similarly, your lawyer will also do the same research. So it is very important. Often, a lot of the times when we reply to medical legal queries from the hospital, I often emphasize to our legal team to say that the legal team should be assisted by the doctor, because the doctor should be a good lawyer. He should, because the basis of your argument on why you selected a particular treatment should be based on science and it should be based on ethics. And most of the time we have found that doctors are ethical. They actually choose a particular modality which is based on a particular science, but he is not able to communicate the same properly or is not able to document it. And it is integral to our part that the more research you do, the more better you will document, the more better you will risk communicate. So it's very, very important that in all three arguments that I'm speaking about here, that evidence-based medicine, risk communication, or medical legal litigation, research is going to be paramount importance. Now, I'm going to give you a little anecdote of a particular part that I really like. You know, we've always talked about artificial intelligence, and today we are talking about, will artificial intelligence help us make better decisions? So I had given this very interesting talk that I gave at the platform of the Indian Institute Indian Institute of Science with a group of Stanford doctors on the fundamental aspects of artificial intelligence versus natural stupidity, and I reiterated this lecture at TISS. A fundamental question that I wanted to ask here was, does artificial intelligence supersede natural stupidity? And the question here is, will the future of healthcare be driven by artificial intelligence? So I just want to give you a very simple anecdote. A marketing agent was given the overall market of Dubai and Arab countries to market cola. So he goes to these Arab countries where he's sitting in Dubai with his friend in a pub and actually boasting about how he has made a very strategic plan to increase the marketing efforts of cola. So he tells his friend, look, you know what, we've been hearing that the cola market has gone down because they have faced a very, very major language barrier, and that's why they are not able to effectively market cola. So I've been brought in here to be the head of marketing, and I'm planning to come up with some disruptive campaigns. So his inquisitive friend asks him, so how are you planning to do so? And he says, look, I have some very interesting AI algorithms that I've worked on, And I've come up with this very disruptive campaign of a man lying dead tired in the desert, drinks a cola and starts to run. Cut to chase, and I believe this AI-powered solution has told me that we will be able to spin off the entire game to more than 90% of the Arabs having a cola in next 3 months. So time went on, and both of them met after 3 months in the same pub at a drink in the evening. So his friend, the marketing head, looked a little dull and dejected, while his friend inquisitively asked him, "I thought you must be the CEO of the company right now with such a disruptive plan." So his friend answered, "Unfortunately, something went wrong. The artificial intelligence solution did not tell me that the Arabs read from right to left. The data went wrong." So there was a particular connotation that the man running in the desert drinks a cola and lies dead in the desert. The entire aspect of intelligence gets defaulted and gets defeated when you look at algorithms that are going to drive human intelligence. So it's very, very important. And I'm saying this because today, even in research, we believe I get at least in a week one person who tells me, "Sir, I've got this brilliant idea where I can use AI to actually solve a problem." And I keep telling them, please first identify the real problem. Please first identify the real research. Again, I would like to allude to the presentation by Dr. Somendra. He very beautifully alluded in his talk about the title of the article, the actual substance of it, and that's very, very important to find the right question. You cannot find the right question by laziness. You cannot find the right question through artificial intelligence, because that can be equated to natural stupidity, because you are hoping that a machine is going to solve it. A machine cannot do the research for you because you have to deal with humans, and that's what I wanted to convey through this. And it's very, very important that every time, I keep using this thing to say that when Newton saw the apple, he saw the laws of gravity. When Steve Jobs saw the apple, he gave me my Apple computer, which is most of the times not compatible with most systems. So each one of us can see the problem in a unique way. We need not get bogged down and worried about having the same problem. Even today, if it's the most simplest thing of a tympanic membrane perforation or a tonsillitis, or if it's a neck node mass, each one of us can look at it in a unique way to make a unique contribution. And I believe that that's the fundamental thing. Here, the most important thing and the fundamental question is on how do I get a brilliant idea for research? And I would like to encourage her. This is a question that one of the students asked me after I was giving a presentation at a medical college. And I really appreciated this question, and I answered him that hold on to one patient's problem strongly and deeply enough to stir your soul, and you will be flooded with ideas. You will be flooded with research questions. Just before I entered this particular meeting, I was in a very beautiful meeting with the Indian Institute of Science chair of 2 labs. We were talking on mathematical oncology we were talking on complete new 3D rendering of spheroid models on this. And it was just a pleasure to listen to each one of them frame their questions in such a systematic way. It's very, very important for you to look at how do you frame your question. And I'm telling you, my friends, it's not an easy thing. Sometimes years pass by in framing a question, and that's one thing very, very important. And that is why it is very, very important for you to understand that we are not constrained by the discipline of rigor, but by the limits of the purpose to make a difference. And that is defined by our imagination. So one thing that I want to again reiterate with this and tell you is that, look, the discipline of rigor means I'm working very hard. Why am I working very hard, but I don't get the right question? Oftentimes, I think the 2 things that you need to blend here is your reach towards building a purpose on why do I want to do this in a purposeful way, and then imagine by breaking your current boundaries of education, because a lot of the times I believe your education itself is a hindrance. And I must tell you all that sometime back I gave a podcast on this, on ignorance is power. I was giving a lecture at the Tuck Business School event where a lot of the CEOs of the global CEOs had come for this meeting. It was a very interesting meeting, and at the end of it, the Harvard professor was with me. We had a very nice discussion, and my presentation ended with some very interesting questions. It was called 20 Minutes to Disruption. In the audience sitting was the Rolls-Royce CEO. the head of Rolls-Royce walked to me and we had a very nice conversation. It was a small closed door meeting of 50 odd people. So he walked to me and he said, Dr. Rao, he says, I believe that in the 20th century, knowledge was power. And in the 21st century, ignorance is going to be power, because education has somewhere curtailed and restricted our thinking to think freely. Because of which, Rolls-Royce told me that whenever they want to design some absolutely new fascinating car, they go to school children sometimes to discuss with children on how would they like to have a car. And they told me, one of the chief designers from Derby was also there. They told me that every time we want to look at them, these children draws a flying car. I mean, if you give this to an engineer, he will draw you the same old boring model of another car. But these kids were able to show you a very unique, disruptive model of a flying car. I mean, that is the kind of thinking that you would require in order to engage and expand the horizons of your thinking. And that is what I wanted to bring you to please stimulate your imagination. And I must tell you today that I'm especially talking this to students and saying that you all are at much better of position than I am. And that is what is your power. To say it's not your knowledge. You may think that I'm more knowledgeable than you. Maybe it's your ignorance that is a bigger strength for you, that you will be able to imagine better than me. And that's a very, very fundamental thing that you need to acknowledge within yourself to expand the horizons of research here. And, I'm not sure how many of you all know this. So I'm going to pose this question. Maybe if any one of you all know this, you can type in an answer and I'll ask Samir sir to give you an award and Bharti madam to give you an award for this. So this is, I wanted all of you to look at these 9 names and tell me, what do these 9 names have in common? Theodore Cocker, Gullstrand, Alexis Carrel, Robert Barany, Frederick Banting, Walter Hess, Werner Flossman, Charles Huggin, and Joseph Murray. These are very, very nice 9 inspiring names. I call them the 9 musketeers. If somebody can take a wild guess and maybe punch it into your discussion chamber, we can towards the end, maybe our moderator sir, Sushil sir, can take the final decision on who gave the right answer. I want all of you all to think on this and maybe punch in your answers on what do these 9 people have in common. And I'm going to maybe skip this and come towards the end and answer this question at a little later date, if we have the time. The other important thing that I wanted to ask all of you is, you need to understand that translational research, that is from bench to bedside and practice, on an average can take up to 17 years. And that is what clinical practice has shown us. It is very, very important to understand here that the T1, which is the time 1 phase, is developing treatment and interventions, can take phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials, takes a pretty long period. And thereafter, the T2 phase, which actually deals with testing effectiveness of this particular thing. And then the last phase, which is the T3, which is dissemination of this. Now, all 3 of this can take as high as 17 years. It is very, very important thus to reverse this chain from practice to bedside to bench. And that is what most of the research today is being focused on, to understand how can you take a lot of the research from bedside to bench. And that's why to all the 3,700 registered participants today, you own the responsibility for the present and the future to take bedside learnings to benchside. And this is going to be only coming, and the world over is moving towards benchside medicine from bedside medicine. So it's important for you to today, I'm just giving you my previous call example, which I had from 5:30 to 6:30 with Indian Institute of Science, was fundamentally to discuss what did you at the bedside see were the most important problems. And based on that, the bench is going to decide on should I work on that or not. So you are the ones who are going to decide the practice. You are the one who's going to decide to the left the bench. So please note this, that all of this is your responsibility. So unless you address this research at the very fundamental level of it, you are going to miss out. The other aspect of it, which I think is very interesting, is COVID-19 taught us a very beautiful hyperloop. We were working on almost about 3 to 4 drugs during this COVID period. And I must tell you that it created a hyperloop between research and practice. So even when you had to go from bench to bedside, we had to learn a lot from the bedside and take it back to the bench. And this was a phenomenal learning that we got through this entire efforts to actually disseminate and actually expand the scope of our work in an effective manner. So we do, one thing we have learned from COVID is that research can be a hyperloop. So now I must also warn you that look, if you look at the professions of the future, which we thought will come up, but who have already come. You know, I learned this during a very nice talk I was giving at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, IIMB, where we had a very, very interesting discussion on how are we going to look at professions. And I heard these names, which I noted down, and I'm sharing this with you in that discussion. So IIM actually presented to me an interesting discussion on what are the professions of the future which already exist today. I am not sure how many of you all have heard of this, a drone runner. This is a man who handles a drone. He's like a pilot. He's a person who's almost got the qualification of a pilot and the technical expertise to actually man it from the ground. You've got medical clowns. These are people who go to hospital because doctors have made life boring for patients. So many of these go as medical clowns to entertain patients. A chief belief officer. I was talking to the Future Group team. They have something called as a chief belief officer because they believe that the chairman of the organization or the founder, head of the organization should have the same vision as that of a chaprasi, cleaner or a janitor. Now that is what needs a chief belief officer, a person who shares the vision, like an HOD, head of the department who has the same vision as that of the junior most resident. That's the kind of things that you would require to create systems. Chief dreamer, epigenetic counselors, ethical hackers, and masters of disasters. I mean, now you could not imagine that even these are going to be the professions of the future, but unfortunately, they've already been existing today as of now. So what I want to tell you, my friends, is for the future, please note that the next 10 years, you cannot imagine what is going to happen. It is going to be so fast as a technological revolution that you will have machines, you will have a lot of interesting technologies that are going to come and join hands with you. So rather than getting worried, rather than getting panicked, the route that is going to be required is the research route. So we've actually at HCG been working on something called as the Surgeon Scientist Program, where every of our fellows, if you ask our fellows today, we've got totally about 8 fellows odd in our department. 8 fellows of them have been also working jointly on bedside to bench research, which means they've been finally working on genetic questions, on genomics, microbiomics, and a whole lot of them to move towards what I call the gene side medicine. So a whole lot of interesting work is going on, and maybe if you have any specific questions, I can articulate some of these on what projects they are doing and how they are able to look at it. So we've at HCG now recently started also the PhD programs in head and neck surgery, in surgical oncology, medical oncology, in several other aspects of it. So what I believe in a lot of the things is going to be the future of cancer care. And this is a very beautiful article that you all should read. It appeared in the November 2017 in Lancet. And this article is a very good eye-opener. I think it's a 52-page, very interesting article read that talks about the future of cancer. And you know, the government of US way back prepared something called as the Blue Ribbon Panel, which was here in 2016, which was then set up by Joe Biden himself, along with the NIH, to fund the fundamental innovative questions in cancer. And they created something called the Cancer Moonshot, which looked at enabling technologies, immunotherapy, precision medicine, personalized medicine, and big data. They believed that these are going to be the future of oncology, and the funding currently is going on in these areas. Again, I'm trying to tell you that grant writing, research is a very, very good way and a lucrative way and an ambitious way of advancing your career. So this is one of the research projects taken up by my colleague, Dr. Shalini, when she started looking at P53 tumor expressions in cancer. I'm just kind of giving you a very simple example to tell you. We all know P53 is a tumor suppressor gene that's a bad prognostic factor. Our study in this particular area gave us a very interesting finding. What it told us is that in all of these groups that we studied the P53 mutation, only loop 2 and loop 3 mutations of the codons resulted in bad prognosis. All the rest was very good, which means these patients who died with the disease were actually patients of mutations who had the mutations in the codon of 2 and 3, loop 2 and 3. But importance was all the other particular patients which is without the disease were alive, which means 2/3 of the patients were alive who still had the mutation. So it is very, very important for us to understand a lot of the times that the assumptions we have in cancer or in science in large may be wrong. And there are several assumptions like this that we talked about, that this research scientist is a dying breed. So there is increasing pessimism about the ability of pursuing research with your clinical study. So in the last few slides, I elaborated and re-emphasized to you why I believe this is going to be the future of clinical medicine. And there are a lot of wrong assumptions in this. One is you reduce your fiscal gains, it compromises outcomes, it's time consuming and not relevant to me. I can tell you with fair certainty today at Head and Neck Department in HCG, we are running almost close to 27 odd projects from various people. Dr. Akshay from our team is spearheading the work on laser research. He's spearheading a lot of work on other clinical areas. Shalini is doing some work on genetics. Each of my fellow must be doing some work on 2 or 3 projects. Again, trying to tell you this is feasible. This is very much feasible in a busy clinical setup where we are able to perform. So we've actually created some of these programs where we can actually look at potential areas in which we can build research. And these, I believe, are the 4 areas which you can consider: basic science, clinical epidemiology, health research methodologies, medical education, medical administration, health services research, biotechnology, and innovations. So a whole lot of research lies ahead of you. You can get funding from all of these organizations. It could be intramural, institutional. It can be governments, consortiums. It can be collaborative between, like we're doing some research with Indian Institute of Science, where HCG and Indian Institute of Science have joined together to collaboratively pool their resources together, and we did not require much funding for it. Or there was one collaboration project which we did with the government of Karnataka in which we pooled resources. Crowdfunding is another method. Intramural researchers, NGOs sometimes can fund researchers and startups. So this is another program that we are running with Nature Masterclass on scientific writing and publishing, where we help you interact with 36 journal editors, understanding how to publish a good paper. How do you effectively publish a good paper? And what I want to leave you all with is some very important thoughts, that responsible research and innovation is the need of the hour. This is what we call ELSA or ELSI. So the Europe and the American groups have taken this as ethical, legal, social aspects of innovation. This is a very, very big, growing, powerful forum of scientific experts globally, which talks about RRI, responsible research and innovation. And this is where you people will be in the next coming years. You will not be able to differentiate between research and innovation. Research and innovation are going to come and join hands. And I'm telling you, if you listen to my lecture 10 years from now and replay this, you will say that this slide sums all of that. That markets, economy, wealth will have to talk to research, academia, knowledge and value, and they both will have one common ecosystem. They both will not be segregated, because today we know from even our India model, even if you study the India model today, less than 1% of our GDP goes for research. Whereas if you look at the UK government model, they give close to 6% GDP for research alone. So it's very, very important to change the entire structure of this to actually advance the growth of this. And this is something that I spoke on at the last Harvard Business School meeting, wherein I was invited to discuss on some points, and I spoke about conscious capitalism, which means that we are going to actually look at capitalism not in a way of sustaining a problem, but solving a problem through a conscious approach, where we are going to look at solving the problem and yet looking at sustaining it, where we are going to look at wealth creation with value creation and ambition with purpose. And if anybody is interested, and if you've heard about the Boston Consulting Group, it's one of the biggest world-renowned groups on auditing and on planning, which actually wrote a very beautiful article a few weeks back called Transforming Humanity Using the Heart, the Head and the Hands, where they said head means envisioning the future and aligning on the big rocks, understanding what are the priorities for humanity. Heart is where you inspire and empower people and build a team, and hands is when you execute with agility. So now this is also applicable to each department in our fraternities and in our departments. So I was proposing to Government of India that we now have to take up create in India. We've done Make in India, but Make in India is ending up into many people sitting and thinking Make in India means you import from China, but you assemble in India. So we wanted to actually look at India taking the next big stand, and the Government of India has come forward to actually create so many opportunities in this that I'm going to just flip through a couple of these innovations. I've been working on various of these innovations aspects which have its fundamentals in research. These are not innovations without research. Research, remember, leads to innovations. It's the foundation block and the basement of innovations. So a few of those things that we actually worked on from our side was looking at a voice prosthesis in these throat cancer patients. I'm talking about today with the support of Government of India, we've been able to reach out to more than 400 patients, 9 countries, helping with these voice rehabilitation programs, which was only possible because Government of India took over the program. We've invented some tracheostomy tubes. I've got a patent on something called Drone Bot, where we actually integrated a drone and a robot and built something to carry out cancer screenings. We've got an invention on a cancer drug that we've invented. We've got a patent on glycolytic pathways to look at newer ways to target glucose pathways. And our recent paper on this got published on how does electron acceptance help carcinogenesis. It was a paper on physics and chemistry. We're working on a new thing of the P53 vaccine, which we have just completed. We've developed our own indigenous extended reality glasses, which is like a surgical loop. This is a robotic retractor that we invented because we wanted to do robotic surgeries, and the Western retractor costed about 8 to 10 lakhs. So we actually invented our own retractor, and today we've been doing n number of surgeries. At least we've conducted 60 odd surgeries with robotic just by using a simple device. When the Western one costed us about 8 to 10 lakhs, which is with import duty, we did one at 50,000 rupees. This is another invention of ours where we looked at an interactive glove, which actually helps interactive and tries to look at understanding brain waves to convert it into speech. So I just listed a few of these to tell you that we are in the era of reverse mentoring. We are re-looking at the whole thing, and that's what I wanted each one of you to understand, that reverse mentoring is going to be required. And this is something that I was talking that what will countries which have advanced economies will have to learn from smaller economies? What will startups have to teach corporations, and what will medical students have to teach their teachers? There's going to be a whole lot of changes post-COVID, which I anticipate, and I just want to leave you with a few thoughts on, especially for our students, to say that look, we all have ambitions. We all want to build a hospital. We want to be a director or a HOD or anything, which is a natural course of our growth. Eventually you will become an HOD. If you stick for long enough in your subject, you will become a head of the department or something. But you need to also drive a purpose into your career. And that can only happen through research. And I must encourage all of you please take up this initiative. And I think one of the things that I often look at is Mother Teresa as one of those standing examples to drive purpose for you. We run a lot of programs on innovations, and I just want to close my remarks by saying, if opportunity wants to knock, you should be able to build a door, not wait for somebody to open the door. And that is what today's research is going to be about. And I think I'm going to close with this. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I again want to thank Bharti Madam. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope I did justice, and Samir Sir for this platform, and Dr. Reddy's and the full team, my moderator, Sushil Sir, for this patient listening. If there's any questions I can answer, I'll be happy to do that.
Sir, yeah, this topic was very... Hello?
Yeah, we are hearing.
Yes, the topic was very different one, but you made an excellent, wonderful presentation, sir. You have given a good insight on this topic, both for PG students as well as PG senior teachers. You were presented in a very lucid language. You had also posed this question that to say that what was common about this 9 musketeers.
Yes, sir.
I invite questions, sir.
I think so.
We hear that a lot of the times research topics put you to sleep. we fear that. So we wanted to check on that aspect to keep them alert.
Sushil, you have the questions, I think.
Dr. Prakash A. Munka from Bokaro Steel City. Is a question. All nine were eccentric in their thinking, and haha, yes, okay.
They were eccentric. Actually, that is correct, but that's partly correct.
Again, here's Dr. Prakash. Again, here's what's crowdfunding?
What's crowdfunding? So I'll answer the first question. I think all 9 of them were surgeons and they were Nobel laureates.
Okay.
All 9 of them were Nobel laureates, and these are the only 9 Nobel laureates we have produced from surgeons. And I thought I wanted to end this by saying that we need more Nobel laureates, and that can only come from the younger generation. That can only come from this generation, and they need to take that responsibility. Otherwise, these 9 will remain, and it will remain for the next 10 years for the same slide. So we have to change that somewhere, and that can only come with the clinical scientist approach. And again, like what Somendra sir said, it is through research, through publication that you will actually get this benchmark. And crowdfunding, I think crowdfunding is the current approach. If somebody Googles up, you will get to know more information. But how can you look at, let's say, if I want to help a patient with 1 lakh rupees, and if I can't get that support, if I go to the internet today, there are social media platforms that reach out to 1 lakh people who can give 1 rupee each and help you treat that patient. That's what is called crowdfunding. So each one of them deposits 1 rupee into their account, and you have 1 lakh rupees through a crowdfunding platform. So I've been working with 1 or 2 of them who have actually raised to me 10 lakhs, 12 lakhs for several patients for their treatments, for complex therapies, for bone marrow transplants, and several like this. So I think this is possible in today's ecosystem, and US has now started this for research also.
The other question is, sir, from same Dr. Prakash Munka is for, I think, Dr. Somendra, that how to start writing papers. Any topic, however trivial or basic, one may think, if it is of relevance in improvement of a common condition, is important. So please suggest how to start it, how to start a topic, how to select a topic.
Dr. Munka, it is nice to hear from him again. I really cherish the previous meetings with you. Anything, we can start writing on anything. Do you know, we had been searching about the Cochrane database. Now, till 2015, they had only one paper, paper they could consider about the indications for tonsillectomy. We do tonsillectomy so often, but we do not have any specified guidelines for indications for tonsillectomy. And in say 1995 and 2015, till 2015, they have only 5 papers to consider about the indications. They still cannot come out with any indication or any guidelines on indications. Recurrent childhood epistaxis. It is a very common thing, but we do not have any guidelines. We give so many medicines, but ultimately it has been seen that simple application of antiseptic creams are sufficient to control 90% of recurrent childhood epistaxis. So you can search the Cochrane database, and you'll find that there are a lot of loopholes, a lot of gaps in the knowledge pool. So you find your niche and you fill up that niche. There are lots of areas and common areas. They do not need any spectacular surgeries or spectacular achievements, but the normal things that we normally do are not yet standardized.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Somendra, because we all think paper writing means there should be of high standard. But the normal common things we should put across, and then we should make the paper. That's what we keep telling to our students also.
Yes, there
and
is
then-
that of tangible papers or acceptable papers on the simple things.
Very true, Dr. Somendra. Another question is by Dr. Yogesh Dabulkar. Is what is Salami Publishing?
Okay, can you share my screen for a while?
Sure.
Yogesh, it is a nice question. Where just a few months back, we had been going for a journal club meeting in our college. So we had been searching articles. We had been talking on some article on use of beta histone in Meniere's disease, and suddenly we found that the article we had been talking about has a twin publication by the same authors. One article in International Journal of Otology and another in a similarly respected journal. So from there we searched for any more such publications and found that there are lots of such publications, and these are called salami slicing. They came out with the guidelines of use of beta histone in Meniere's disease. One article published in context of Italy, and other article has been published in context of Europe. But the authors are the same. The data is about 20 more cases, but the ultimate conclusion remains the same. So this is what is salami slicing and salami science. You do one research work, and with that research work, you publish 2, 3, 4 articles. In case of one of my articles, our article was published in JLO, and after some time, suddenly I found that another similar article with the data of the same patient was published in the Malaysian journal. So I talked to the editor, and the editor said nothing can be done. It has been published, and you as author can decide on what to do. So either another author is taking taking over your patient to publish another article, or the same authors publish 2, 3, 4 articles on the same research work they have done. This is plagiarism, self-plagiarism, and this should not be allowed. Thank you.
Yes, it's clear.
Thank you, sir.
Any more questions?
Does age mean anything when we are doing research? Do you feel that the younger the person, the better would be their application while they are doing research, or even senior people can look at that as a career? Start off. I'm talking about starting off, not otherwise.
With Dr. Bishal Rao around, we think we can expand our horizons, whatever may our age be.
Yes, sir. No, I think, sir, I think the fundamental thing about a lot of us, it is not about the physical age. It's about the biological age and the emotional age for us. It's the creative age. I think if we have the child within us all the time asking that question, which I feel a lot of the times my professors have asked. I think it is that child within you that asks that question, which simplifies some of these things. I still remember a lot of the research questions would come from those rounds when somebody would ask that funny question, or in that examination when you asked, when that examiner himself thought of it first and asked the student. I think that point of nurturing that is got absolutely no age limitation. And I believe it can be an enjoyable space for us. It's a relaxing space also. Research can be a very good relaxing space for us.
I totally agree with Dr. Vishal. During this COVID era, mastoidectomy, while I was doing mastoidectomy, and there are lots of HEPA filter issue, and this thing came into my mind. So I started a project and put into the BIRAC, and it got accepted. It came into the second phase, and after second phase, because it was not a vaccine kind of thing, and it was to make a cabinet kind of thing to do, ma'am, sir, to make we are dealing with the aerosol generating things. So it was to avoid the things. Since I'm still working, so I'm not able to, because now I thought I will do it my own self and then patent itself, because the BIRAC has said we don't have time. It was only 6 month time. So BIRAC has accepted since phase 2, and they said let's wait for some time and we will give you the answer. So I'm still waiting for the answer. So it's a very good thing. So I totally agree. Create in India rather than assemble in India.
Yeah.
So there are many more things in the mind, but most important thing is in India is that we are teaching, we are clinicians, we are teaching undergraduates, postgraduates, doing surgeries, doing the research, and 24/7 we are just working. Being the medical in the medical college, what I feel is I am very much interested in research. And there are many things I want to do, but still I feel the time constraint is very, very important thing. As to we have to give the time to the family as well, and research is something which is 24/7 in the mind.
Yeah.
And you cannot deny that. One cannot deny how to write the research paper in the night, 2 o'clock. You have the idea, you have the copy pen, you start writing, if I'm not wrong. And it can be from onco to auto, anything. It can be anything. And I still have ideas in my mind, which I keep on writing that I have to do it. And the pilot studies are there. My studies went into the ICMR as well. So, but there are, I'm very sorry that you said very rightly that only less than 1% of GDP goes for the research in India, which is really, really, we should say, and that to in ENT, it's very less.
Yes, Doctor.
So,
In fact, I wanted to be a little more truthful. Actually, it's close to 0%, but I didn't want to be harsh.
So it's open discussion, and it was really nice to understand that really some people understand this, that research is very important, and after research, the publication, what kind of publications we are doing or we are trying to do is something that is, to cut a very sorry figure, is not really good publications which we really want to do. But what we want to do, government, we need ample supply of money. Funding is very important, I think, from the government.
So I just wanted to add one point here. In our fellowship program, we actually created a simple Trello board. If any one of you all can use Trello boards, we actually started having each one of these research projects monitored on Trello boards for each student. And what we told each student was, each student's target was that every month he should write one letter to editor. And Somendra sir will agree, it's a very simple way to refine your skills. I mean, letter to editor. Just when you read an article, just write a letter back to the editor and say, these are my observations. After 3 rejections, you will realize no, they are accepting because your perspective, you are refining your language. Don't start and wait for the first original research article. Start writing letters to editor. Not case reports also. I'm saying case report itself, you will then wait for 6 months for the rare case. I'm saying don't. Every day make a reading habit, and in every week write one letter to editor. Very simple way to do it. I remember one of my students, he was given an award by Elsevier's for the highest papers he wrote that year. He was such an inspiration for everybody because he kept on pursuing this. He took that suggestion very seriously. He said, sir, I will write. Every day he wrote so much that he finally, Elsevier's gave him an award from their side for the highest international publication index paper. And I told him, man, you are an inspiration to all of us now, because we never thought that you're going to take us so seriously. So he did it, he achieved it. Same way I tell them, one letter to editor, one review article, one prospective, one retrospective study. You do 4 of these. That's enough. You will be able to build one spectrum of it, and during your training period, focus on these 4. You will have your ecosystem. Most of us have an ecosystem where people can guide. And collaborative research, wherein 4 of us join together, because like you rightly said, time constraint is there, funding is less. But if we can collaborate, you see, that I feel is the fastest way to move forward. So my students nowadays, what they do, 2 of them write, one person says that I will write this paper first, and I'll be the first author. In this, you will be the second author. You contribute the second part. Now they both have 2 papers together, but with one effort. So that way they can collectively write a lot of together things by equally contributing as well as complementing.
Rightly said, sir. True.
Yes, Vishal, you are an inspiration for, I think, not only for the residents, even for us also. You have done so much, actually, really good. Any other questions, Shalini?
No, ma'am,
In the
I think
box,
lots to learn.
Sushil?
Lots to learn.
Actually,
Vishal has sown some seeds for imagination. So
yeah. Actually, Samir has done the right thing in putting these 2 at the end of this first session of our academics. Like he said, no, we'll have Soumendra to talk about the scientific writing and Vishal about the research. These are the 2 things which we lack now in India. I think that's really, we should actually inspire our teachers also, like us also. I think it's a responsibility of our teachers also. We should, seed this in our students. Like when they join, they should start research. As Vishal said, yes, if the PGs, they put to, like 2 of them sit together and write a paper, like their numbers also will increase. I think we all should take it to us, and I think the AOI will take this forward and write a letter to the HODs of each department, our medical colleges, so that it will motivate them. And I think Vishal has done a wonders, Vishal. I've seen you. I've seen you as a postgraduate, and I've seen you how we have grown. And I think they should keep like you people as a model. Like you can achieve anything if you want. That's what I've seen. So I think all you 3, you, Srinivas, DV Srinivas, they all, path breakers who have gone apart from learning surgical skills, the innovations and the research.
Madam, one suggestion is that we should make them all read all PGs across colleges should read the Indian Journal of Otolaryngology and mandatory write a letter and bombard Soumendra sir with lots of letters.
That's what, now we'll do it.
I mean, everyone should take some time out and write something. I think it's a very good habit. It's such a good journal. It comes with such good articles, which have such good quality. I think we should utilize this and ensure that each one of them is reading the article, imbibing it, and making some correspondence. I think they'll enjoy it.
I think I'll do it because I've got the ENT first year PG group of Karnataka, all I've collected. So we have started some program for them. I think I'll initiate that so that Soumendra sir will have, many things now.
Excellent suggestions. Actually, he is continuously stretching our horizons.
Well, in that case, we will need a full-time editor and not an honorary editor. So that is another career opportunity for at least 1 or 2 people. I think any more questions, or I would like to ask Dr. Kaushal to propose the vote of thanks for this excellent last two lectures to our series. I think this was really the icing on the cake for this entire series. I truly feel that we saved the best for the last.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Can I share my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, Kaushal.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, to our esteemed speakers and the moderators. Speakers have given a wonderful lecture today, and as Sir has said, it was a cake on the icing. It was a wonderful climax to our first part of the series. So, on behalf of the Association of Otolaryngologists of India, I extend a sincere appreciation to the team of Dr. Reddy's lab, Vimlesh Prabhu, Yojana Shetty, and Indranil of the Grand Era division. They have given us a fantastic platform for the past 6 months continuously. And I would like to say that Vimlesh, I don't know whether any PGs or residents or consultants have learned anything or no, but I think Vimlesh has learned a lot on ENT. He has attended each and every lecture for 2 hours, all the 24 lectures in the series. So on behalf of AOI, I would like to present the certificate of appreciation to Vimlesh. Vimlesh, are you around?
Vimlesh?
Very much, sir.
So thank you, Vimlesh. We look forward
Thank you,
to. I will send you the soft copy. So we look forward to another round next year after we start, maybe in February or something. And thank you very much. Thank you to all the delegates also for making this AOI lecture series a grand success. Thank you.
In fact, when you said you want to share the screen, I didn't know this was a surprise.
We saved the best for the last, Vimlesh.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
Thank you.
But as rightly said by you, I have really learned.
No, and it's been a wonderful series, and we've had so many good words about all the lectures that we've had, and we will, so all good things need to come to an end. So this particular lecture series comes to an end today, but we will be back next year with another lecture series, probably in a different form, maybe in a kind of a panel discussion format, and something that will benefit not only our PG students, but also junior and senior consultants. And I am hopeful, and in the same vein, sure that it will be viewed by as many people as this particular series that we have. So look forward to meeting you all in the next series early next year. And thank you very much once again, everybody, all our office bearers for Dr. Bharti for giving us the ideas about this, Dr. Kaushal, Yogesh for putting in a lot of effort, all our moderators for coming forward and doing their job so well, and of course all our speakers who've been delivering wonderful lectures every week after week. And last but not the least, thanks to Vimlesh and Dr. Reddy's for providing us the platform and functioning absolutely, completely without any hitch. Right from the beginning, we've had no hitches, no glitches in this whole series. And it's been a tremendous effort on their part. Thank you once again, everybody.
And sir, last thing to add is all these lectures have been archived on our AOI website as well as the AOI YouTube channel. So all the delegates and PGs can go back and relearn whenever they need to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, on behalf of the Dr. Reddy, I thank the AOI, all the office bearers for giving us this platform in these difficult times when we were not able to reach the doctors, and this has really helped us to connect with all the doctors in a big way across Pan India. So thanks a lot, Samir sir, Bharti madam, Kaushal sir, Yogesh sir, and all the speakers who have really given us this opportunity to connect with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Vishal.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Sam.
Thank you, Dr. Sunil. Thank you, Dr. Kaushal.
Vimlesh, can we have a photo session?
Yes,
Yes, sir, I'm just stopping the live streaming.
Yeah.